There is a comfortably off Britain that will look at this budget and say everything's fine. But then there's the rest of Britain, particularly outside London, who, when they hear we're sharing in the proceeds of growth, look at each other over dinner of an evening and say we're worse off than we were 10 years ago.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC. This is Phone Farage. UKIP leader Nigel Farage takes your calls with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. This is Phone Farage with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
This is Nigel Farage with another edition of Phone Farage here on LBC. And you could be on the line now with your question. So to get involved, please call me on 0345 60 60 973. And you can watch here on our website, lbc.co.uk. And our first caller is Phil in Sidcup. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good. You said that the NHS nearly killed you, and you've tried to push through a policy for private health insurance within your party. How can we sort of trust you now not to damage the NHS, considering your views for private health insurance?
Well, no, I mean, let's deal with that. What I said a few years ago was we're going to have to think differently. Let's look at what the French do. Let's look at what the Dutch do, where there is, you know, a much bigger insurance element in how they fund healthcare. I open up lots of debates, Phil, within UKIP, some that I believe in, some that I think have to be had for us to make up our minds. And we have decided, actually, if you look at what happened since 1997, the increasing privatisation of the NHS hasn't worked. And I'll give you two examples. One of the PFI contracts, do you remember, where private money was going to come in to build shiny new hospitals? Well, that did happen, but it's left the NHS with a repayment bill of £300 billion. And secondly, the outsourcing of some of the functions of hospitals, such as cleaning, I don't think you, me, or anybody else would say has been a success. So, no, we're saying this. We want the NHS free at the point of delivery, but we want it better run. Now, the point that I made personally, that probably nobody in Britain more grateful than I am to the National Health Service. I, twice have smashed my body up pretty seriously, and I can tell you that if you are an acute case, I think we've got the best health service in the world. They're fantastic if you're really, really in trouble. Where with me, it was, well, weak is an understatement, is in diagnostics. And I was fortunate that I was working for a firm in London who had private healthcare, and after 6 weeks of continuous misdiagnosis, I went privately, had a quick scan, and within 24 hours was on the operating table. If that hadn't happened, Phil, I'd have been dead. And just because you criticise some elements of something doesn't mean you don't value it, doesn't mean you don't love it, and doesn't mean you don't believe in it, all right? So UKIP does not want to privatise the NHS. We do not want to turn it into an American-style system. The one party that did privatise large amounts of it was Labour, and I don't think it's worked very well.
Quick response from you, Phil.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm happy to respond.
Oh, that's very good. I just have to say, Mr. Farage, you said earlier this week, those that can afford to do it, that is, go private in healthcare, should, and they will find healthcare to suit their needs. You then make the point that many of my listeners would agree, getting an appointment with a GP has become a big problem.
Absolutely.
But so you are saying that people who've got a few quid should go privately?
Well, the rich have got richer. Massive change in this country. That sort of richest 5 or 7% of the country could easily afford private medical care. And I know that people working in
So they should?
Well, I think it would be a good thing if they did, because it would actually help relieve some of the burden that is on the NHS.
How would you do that, though? You
can't force people. You can't force people to do it.
So it would be nudge. And
I would just say, if you can afford it, take out private healthcare. If you're in a high-powered job, getting a GP's appointment now is almost impossible anyway. I mean, really, it's very, very difficult. And if you do that, you'll actually be helping the whole country by lifting some of the burden. I mean, our problem is that, we've got fewer GPs per head than any other country in Europe. We have got a real problem.
And is private healthcare better than NHS?
Well, as I say, I think if you're an emergency, or if you're having a major operation, I personally would have it in a national health hospital every single time, because they've got the backup. But if you need diagnostics, or if your life is complicated and you want your hip done on a certain date, then clearly going privately is going to suit you. It's not available to everybody, but the more the burden's lifted off the health service, the better, frankly, for the majority, I think it would be.
Where are we going now,
We're
Mr.
going
Farage?
to Simon in Nottingham. Good morning.
Good morning. You said UKIP MEPs should not employ their wives. Should that not apply to MPs as well, like Mark Reckless, who employs his wife as his secretary?
Well, can I say this to you, Simon? Firstly, 1 in 4 members of Parliament do employ a family member of some kind. So I think it's a bit unfair to single out Mr. Reckless when this happens on a very large scale. The second thing I would say to you is this. There are all sorts of MPs and MEPs from this country. Some clearly are pretty lazy and don't bother very hard. Others work extraordinary hours. And if they've got somebody at home they can work with at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, it would be rather difficult with a normal secretarial relationship for that to be. So there are circumstances in which I would say to you, actually, it's not the wrong thing to do. Perhaps there's a question on the sheer number.
Response from you, Simon?
Yeah, but I just want to point out that you previously have said that they should not employ their wives, and you're
Have you
now
said that,
making
Mr. Farage?
No, I've never said that. I said that UKIP MEPs shouldn't employ their wives because I thought we should try and stay above and beyond suspicion. UKIP MEPs, I've laid down no rules for MPs, and I...
Why would there be the distinction there?
Because the whole European system is frankly so much more open to abuse, and we've seen the case with a British MEP, not from our party, a different party, who didn't just employ his wife; he employed 2 of his children as well. So, what I've said is let's try and keep ourselves removed from that as much as we possibly can. All I can tell you is Mark Reckless is an incredibly hard-working bloke.
And do you employ your wife?
No, she's worked for me for a long number of years, most of them unpaid. A brief period of time paid, and she currently still works for me.
Paid or unpaid?
Unpaid from me. Unpaid from me.
Paid from UKIP?
The UKIP helps a little bit with some payment. Very modest payment.
Right.
Very modest
But
payment.
isn't that one rule for them and one for you then?
Well, I tell you what, Nick, I get home at midnight most nights. I get up at 5 in the morning to come and do things like this. If I didn't have the alternative, of course, is to have a live-in secretary, which I don't think with most family arrangements would work terribly well.
No, but
I mean, look, we don't want...
Isn't it easy to just say, yes, you can have them, or no, you can't have them? So it's not MEP versus MP versus party leader. We just have a definitive stance here, Mr. Farage.
I don't want UKIP MEPs in Brussels to be seen. And we've got 1 or 2 issues this morning around this potentially. Well, and I don't want UKIP MEPs to be seen to be going on the gravy train with their whole family. All right?
All right. You mentioned the issues. We have got to come to this. This is, of course, the suggestion that your UKIP MEP and prospective parliamentary candidate down in Kent, down in the constituency that Michael Howard had in Folkestone, isn't it? Janice Atkinson, one of her staff, appears to have availed herself of a bill far in excess of the actual genuine expenditure. What is the situation regarding this, Mr. Farage?
Well, I was deeply shocked when I saw it. I thought one of the most incredibly stupid and dishonest things I've ever seen in my life. This was a member of staff, as you quite rightly say. Exactly what the relationship between that member of staff, the asking for a false bill, and Janice Atkinson is, I don't know. We have suspended Janice Atkinson, and we will hold a disciplinary hearing as soon as possible, which will be chaired independently by somebody from the legal profession, and there'll be representatives of the National Executive of UKIP there, and we will ask the questions and we will judge. It would be a mistake for me to prejudge this, but on the evidence of what that member of staff did, it does not look very good.
Have you spoken with Janice Atkinson?
After midnight last night, she was in bed.
What did you say?
Well, I said, what on earth's going on? What is this? And she said there was confusion, there was a mess up. I didn't get a clear answer. She was asleep when I called.
Right,
so
right.
I'm not going to prejudge this, but certainly as far as the member of staff is concerned,
on a scale of
they have asked a commercial enterprise to do something that, as I understand it, is against the law.
On a scale of 1 to 10, Mr. Farage, with 10 being Jeremy Clarkson not having his steak supper, how angry were you with Ms. Atkinson?
I actually wasn't angry. I was just shocked. I simply couldn't believe that we could find ourselves potentially in this position.
How aware was she of what had gone on?
That's what the inquiry has to find out.
Presumably that was your question.
That is what the inquiry has to find out.
You're not going to share that answer with me at this time?
Well, I didn't get a very clear answer, but we will find out on Monday. Monday.
As soon as that?
Yes, we will. Yeah, obviously, convening something over the weekend's impossible. This only broke late last night. There will be a full disciplinary hearing on Monday, and we will pronounce.
And you know what this speaks to, and you've talked about this in the past. It will be seen that UKIP is a strange party. You have this collection of, I think it was one called Fruitcakes, Losers and Nutters, I think the Prime Minister wants to refer.
They're some of the nicer things. Look, we've had in the space of the last month, I mean, two of the most senior politicians in the country effectively disbarred from being candidates. One from the Conservative Party, one from the Labour Party. The fact that we potentially are joining that club is not a source of happiness to me.
We've got a call on this.
We do. Yeah. Atik in Windsor is going to ask me about this, I believe.
Atik, you're on the radio. And Atik has just dropped off. Mr. Farage, let's go to the other caller that you have notice of there, I think is...
Yeah, John in Tiverton, I think is the...
We're moving on to other matters. John, go ahead.
Yeah, hello, Nigel.
Hello, good morning.
Your main condition for doing any deal with Cameron and the Tories after the election is a referendum this year. I've heard it said that it's possible for this to be prevented, particularly by the House of Lords, stopping the bill going through. Is that true?
I think if the House of Commons was to pass something as fundamental as a referendum on our EU membership, and the House of Lords stopped it, I think they would be effectively signing the death warrant of that chamber, and we'd probably move to an elected Senate very, very quickly indeed. I think it unlikely that the House of Lords would stop this. But John, can I just say this, that what I've said is that if UKIP finds itself in a position of influence after the election, having the referendum now and not going through a phony renegotiation is part of it. But how the referendum is conducted, what the question is, what the rules are, and crucially, who can vote. Who is eligible to vote? Is it just British passport holders or isn't it? They are the kind of terms that I would look for. What I do not want to see is David Cameron do what Harold Wilson did 40 years ago and, frankly, hold a referendum that was not full, free and fair. And that, to me, is the important thing. Let's make our decision on this, but let's do it on a fair-minded basis.
Quick response from you, John.
Question answered.
Well, I hear that a lot. I have to say, I do hear that a lot with Mr. Farage, not necessarily all the politicians. We move on. Nigel Farage,
we move to Bob in Guildford. Good morning, Bob.
Yes, good morning to you, Nick and Mr. Farage.
Hello, sir.
Could I just ask, as the Metropolitan Police Federation in London have recently put out that there's 1,400 fewer police officers in London today as compared to 2010, and we're at a time of increasing severe threat, and yet to receive a £800 million cut further in budgets. What is your stance on policing and to avoid policing falling into, well, levels we've never been before?
Yeah, I know from from sort of campaigning that morale in the police force appears to be incredibly low, not just over cuts to the numbers of frontline policemen, but also some retrospective changes to pensions. And this has happened within policing, and it's happened within the fire service, and it's happened in many ways to the sort of people that complain the least and are the most loyal members of society. So I think both of those issues, Bob, are quite relevant in terms of the morale of our police force. I mean, there are some that think that frontline policing, i.e. Bobby's on the beat, doesn't really matter. And that's a view that has gained quite a lot of currency amongst government, that it doesn't really work. It doesn't really reduce crime. I have to say that stretches credibility as far as I'm concerned. And when I speak to more senior police officers off the record, not on the record, they say that actually the job of policing, the job of apprehending people, the job of charging people is now so bureaucratic that actually more police time is spent filling in forms than it is actually directly dealing with crime. So there are some cultural problems. And, Bob, we're going to have to make some massive decisions over the course of the next 5 years. We've had the budget this week where the Chancellor has tried to paint a rosy picture on things. But, don't forget, this coalition government came together to get rid of the deficit. It's still running at £90 billion a year. We've got some big, big priorities, coming up over the next 5 years. Things we're going to have to cut, things we're going to have to maintain, and one or two things we're going to have to increase. My own view is that the threat we face in this country, from extremists and from people who potentially, could ruin our way of life is so great that I think through the police and perhaps even more through some of our security services, I suspect it's something we're going to have to invest more money in. All right?
Let's go to another call. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, Izzy in Christchurch. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, our question is... I'm a head girl of Twynham Sixth Form.
Well done, you.
Politics. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm in my politics lesson right now as my class.
Okay. Hi, morning, everybody.
We have a question for you.
Yeah.
How would you envision a future change in the electoral system should you enter a coalition?
Well, look, the first past the post system worked very well when it was Whigs versus Tories, when it was Labour versus Tories, and for much of our political life, it has been dominated by a two-party system, as indeed American politics is. First past the post works very well when the person that wins the constituency gets over 50% of the vote. The system then has legitimacy. We're now facing a general election where it's quite likely that the two biggest parties will get less than 2/3 of the vote, and their percentage declines with almost every general election. Izzy, I think the first past the post system is bust. I don't think it works, and I think it's a massive disincentive. You know, if you're a socialist living in Esher, where there's a massive Tory majority, where is the incentive on a rainy Thursday evening to go down to the local primary school? And similarly, if you're a high Tory in Sheffield, let's say. I
wonder why you chose Sheffield.
Well, I just thought I might, you know. So Izzy, I think we need electoral reform. I think it's very, very important. My own view, and this is just my personal view, is there is a system called AV+. And when Tony Blair had a big commission headed by the late Roy Jenkins to look into what would be the fairest system, he concluded, and I never agree with anything else Roy Jenkins ever said, but he concluded that AV+ worked because you would still have the man or woman elected to represent Christchurch directly, so you would know who your MP was, but you would have a second ballot paper on which you could vote for, say, the last 20% of the House, and you would know that your second vote would count towards something. You know, Christchurch has, in the past, been a battleground between the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, with Labour nowhere. You know, this would give Labour voters in Christchurch a reason to participate. But Izzy, tell me, does the majority of your politics class think we need electoral reform?
Yeah. Yeah, we do.
Good. Excellent.
Izzy, how many of you in... It's the host here, Nick. How many in that classroom at the moment?
21.
And some of you presumably will have attained 18 by May the 7th, so you can vote.
Sadly not, we're year 12.
You're lower... OK, I'm sorry, year 13. Yeah. Can I just ask you, I'm going to read out the names of the four big parties. Could your colleagues all cheer and scream and shout if you would vote for the following parties? Are you ready? Can you all hear me? Is this on broadcast in some way? Can the whole...
Yeah, this is fine.
OK, here we go then, in no particular order. Who there in Christchurch would find for the Lib Dems? Interesting. Who would find for the Labour Party?
Labour.
Who would vote Conservative? And who would vote UKIP? Some work to do, Nigel Farage.
Well,
good luck. Great to...
It sounds like the class that are advocating electoral reform actually is sticking to the two parties. But there we are.
Interesting. Thanks, Izzy. We move on. Mr Farage, where are we going?
Great. We're going to James in Welwyn Garden City. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. As you will know, any foreign national living in the UK or at a UK address for more than 6 months is legally bound to join the electoral register. But doing this compels them to do jury service, if called, even though they can't vote in general elections where our lawmakers sit, even if they wanted to. So where do you stand on foreign nationals sitting in judgment on juries in English courts?
I think it's a mistake. I think we need to upgrade and revalue and rethink what the British passport is and what it actually means. And I think it is... I mean, how could somebody not be entitled to vote in the general election and yet be allowed to pronounce, perhaps in a very important case, on a jury? I think, frankly, James, I think we got the system wrong. I really do. What do you think?
Well, I am one of those foreigners.
Yeah.
So I would like to either move my vote here, if I could,
yeah,
in the Netherlands, or be ineligible for jury service.
Yeah, fine. No, listen, I'm with you. It's one or the other. So if you applied for British nationality, you would then get both. But as you are. So you're being given a duty, actually, by us, in a sense,
Completely.
And not of it. Yeah. Listen, I agree with you. This needs rethinking and it needs reforming.
Can I do some emails? Thank you for that call, James. So do some emails that have come in. Graham in Bushy. If there is an EU referendum, Nigel Farage, and we vote to come out, will you disband UKIP as you will have fulfilled your objective? And if you don't, why not?
No, because actually what UKIP is doing already is to think about what happens post-EU. So, for example, trade. Trade is a really key area. And we're the one party writing papers and debating and discussing how we deal with the UK's global trade post being members of the European Union. So I want to say this. Leaving the European Union does not solve our problems, but it gives us the ability to solve all of the problems, and it gives us the ability to be a 21st century global trading nation. So in some ways, winning that referendum is the beginning of a very much more exciting project.
One last one. Wendy in Kent says, I fear that the Westminster paedophile ring story could be the biggest cover-up Britain has ever seen. On the Nick Ferrari show, he asked Nick Clegg whether he agreed with the idea that former police officers have special cover so they can come forward and say what they know. A caller earlier to Nick Ferrari had said that he feared he'd lose his pension if he came forward. Does Nigel Farage agree we need a change in the law?
Yeah, I think we do. This is the whole question of whistleblowers, isn't it?
Yeah, and the trouble is, Mr. Farage, just to tell you, because I've had a police officer come on, his pension is at risk. He says he knows something. I wish he wouldn't tell me what it was. But he's got to look after his family.
Yeah, and the same thing happens in the National Health Service too. And I've seen the same thing happen in the European Commission. And there is this problem that people who... I mean, clearly some people will be vexatious and will say things that aren't true. But equally, there are those that know something of fundamental importance. I have to say, with every week that passes, something new emerges from this Cyril Smith story, and it just looks worse and worse and worse. So, I've got some sympathy for that. Could there be some means by which, under protection... people could blow the whistle without fear, as you say, of losing their pension.
Yes.
Trouble is, a lot of this dates back to 1981.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my concern is when we do find out who the real villains were that covered all of this up, perhaps not many of them will actually be alive.
It's going to blow, though, isn't it?
That's not a reason for not doing it.
Yeah.
But whether the guilty will truly get punished, I'm not so sure. This could be the worst scandal ever in British public life.
Bigger than Savile.
On the face of it, we're talking here. There are allegations of people actually being killed.
Yes, murder. Yeah,
and that's far worse even than the shocking Savile case.
Yep, we need to get it out in the open, whatever it is. Nigel Farage, where are we going now?
We're going to Purley, and we're going to talk to Sheila.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
You were the only politician that ever brought up about foreign aid.
Mm-hmm.
And I quite agree with you. It should be cut drastically. The money is needed back in this country. With all the cuts that are being made, why should we have to suffer to give all this money abroad, which we know is mired in corruption and has been for many, many, many years?
Well, Sheila, you are absolutely stating what I believe and what UKIP believe, and what mysteriously the Westminster Political Club cover their ears to and stamp their feet and scream loudly because they don't want to listen. And David Cameron's actually said that it's the proudest achievement of his government that we now give more money in foreign aid than any other Western country. So that's how they feel. I find it somewhat extraordinary that at the same time as we keep upping the foreign aid budget, we've cut our defence capabilities to a level where we've slashed the Army, Navy, Air Force. We're probably incapable of defending ourselves, and that strikes me as being very odd.
You think we are incapable of defending ourselves, Mr.
Pretty
Farage?
much, yes, and I think there are quite a lot of former very senior military officers who are saying the same thing. The Americans, not that we should always join in their ventures, but the Americans are saying, hey guys, you're not serious players anymore, really. And
it is written today that George Osborne is under a lot of pressure for Conservative MPs in the budget that came out this week. He did not talk about defence. He did not pledge us.
No, they refused to commit. And I was in Strasbourg 10 days ago, where all the debate there now is about a European army. They're not pretending anymore. We're moving towards a European army. And
when you described that on that debate we did together, Nick Clegg said that it was total fantasy.
26th of March last year, we did the debate, you chaired it, and I said, I question, is one of the reasons that we're cutting our defences that we think we're going to go in with a European army and save money.
Clegg said dangerous fantasy.
Nick said it was a dangerous fantasy. And now Mr Juncker, gets up and spouts very loudly, we have to have an EU army. Incidentally, an EU army so that we can show Russia we're serious. Now, when you start seeing big countries or power blocks talking in this way, I think history tells us that's quite a dangerous precedent.
Quick response from you, Sheila, from what you've heard. Quick.
Very good indeed.
That'll do it. Let's move on to other... Let's end there while we're ahead. Where should we go, Mr Farage?
We're going to Mina in Brighton. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Good morning, Nick.
Hello, sir.
I've just got two questions, if that's okay.
Yep.
The first one is, what's your position on refugees, particularly persecuted Christians in the Middle East, such as the Coptic community in Egypt and Sudan?
Yeah, okay.
And the second question is, would you still be able to secure grammar schools and the HS2 if you did sign a supply and confidence deal with Mr Cameron?
Okay, right. Refugees. This country does have a proud record of being one of the most open to genuine refugees. Indeed, my family were genuine refugees, French Protestants who came to Britain, and we did the same for the Jews from Russia and from Germany, and of course the Ugandan Asians who came in 1972, who've been, by the way, the most successful migrant group ever to come into Britain in terms of their achievements since then. This may surprise you, Mina. I was the first British politician to say that I thought, although I want to control our borders and drastically reduce immigration numbers into Britain, I was the first person to say that I thought actually with the situation in Syria, it seemed to me that there were some in the Christian community there who literally had nowhere to go because of the way the whole region has now become very difficult for Christians. Some of it, I have to say, because of us. So yes, I think Britain should continue to honour the principles of the 1951 UN Declaration on Refugee Status, and I would want us to do that. And that would be a sign of civilization. What I don't want us to do, Mina, is to have an open door to hundreds of thousands of unskilled or low-skilled migrants coming into Britain and putting pressure on our health services, our education system, and crucially, in this budget week, depressing the wages of ordinary people. Your second question, you asked, where we stood on grammar schools and HS2. I have long believed that getting rid of the grammar schools is one of the biggest social mistakes we've made in Britain, in post-war Britain, and that is why I believe the 7% whose parents are rich enough to send them to the private schools in this country are now dominating our public life. Media, politics, sport, you name it. And I think that actually the brightest kids from poor backgrounds should have the best opportunities. Ofsted recently said that 2/3 of our brightest youngsters are not achieving the best they could at school. What a terrible waste of a huge national resource. On HS2, I will do anything I can to stop us spending up to £70 billion on this enormous white elephant that might take about 25 years to complete and only really benefits a very tiny percentage of the travelling public at peak times. Do you know, in London, I see that you live in Brighton, and there are lots of people commuting into Brighton. There are people coming in every day to Paddington and Waterloo and other stations in conditions that are frankly third world. I would like to see a fraction of what is being spent on HS2 to upgrade rail lines for the benefit of millions of people. Thank you.
We're going to have one more time for, I think, one more if we go to that fairly rapidly.
We can. Junior in Hendon, good morning.
Good morning, sir. I'd like to ask you your views on the programme that was on recently regarding the racist election in Smethwick, and how does it relate to your party?
This was a documentary that to my listeners' benefit that suggested that it was one of the most racist elections ever fought in that particular part of the country. So your direct question to Nigel Farage would be what, Junior?
His views and...
Well, he might not have seen it, in fairness.
The notion that some of your members are fighting their election based on a racist view.
Okay. Junior, I didn't see the programme. But I guess when you talk about Smethwick, you're probably talking about an election 40 years ago, yes, in which I think the National Front got quite a big share of the vote. Right, fine. OK, I've got a sense of context. Junior, let me say this to you. We are a non-racist, non-sectarian political party. Increasing numbers of the black and ethnic minorities aren't just voting for us, they're supporting us, and they're even standing for us as candidates. So this is a non-issue. where we have ever found those within UKIP that have held racist views, we've got rid of them pretty much immediately. You know, no messing about. That is not the direction in which we want to go. You will find unpleasant, intolerant views in every political party and in all sections of society. It gets particularly highlighted when somebody in UKIP says something unpleasant, because, of course, we're taking on the establishment. But you have my absolute assurance there is no colour prejudice or racism in UKIP at all.
Last question, this one from me, Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
48 days, I think it is, to go to the general election. Where are we with the debates? There's going to be one... I know you laugh. There's going to be one with all 7, maybe 8, who knows, if not more. Then there's going to be sort of specials on Mr. Miliband and Mr. Cameron, but Mr. Clegg doesn't get one of those, neither do you. But UKIP has now been confirmed as one of the 4 main parties, Nigel Farage.
Ofcom have made it clear UKIP is one of the 4 major parties, and it looks like one of the ideas is a 3-way question time with Clegg, Miliband and Cameron. So everything is being done to shut out the UKIP voice, and the reason is... You know, when Junior watched that programme, which gave him some concern, I tell you why they want to shut UKIP out. Immigration is now the biggest issue on voters' minds in this country because of its impact on our lives in this country. Only UKIP offers a pragmatic, sensible solution on Australian-style point system as an alternative, and they will do whatever they can to stop that view from being heard.
And would you consider a legal challenge? UKIP, because if you are, as you rightly say, Ofcom, which is in charge, just to explain to listeners, they regulate broadcasting, so 3 of the big 4 can have a question time special, but you can't. Yeah. Would you challenge that legally?
I get bored with making lawyers rich.
That's it. That's the end of Phone Farage. We cross up program 9:31. This is the moment of the eclipse, I understand. So, Nigel Farage, thank you for being on. Only this would eclipse your appearance here on Phone Farage. We go to the LBC News Bulletin from the roof. Lisa Aziz.
Yes, absolutely, Nick. Thanks very much indeed. Well, I can tell you the skies are certainly darkening up here on the roof of LBC's Leicester Square studios.